All right, we have next up, we've got, let's see, where are you at, Elizabeth? There you are. Okay, I see you.
In here.
Hey, welcome. We are very grateful that you're here with us. You are joining us from California. That's right, from Singing Frogs
Absolutely.
Farm. And
Yes.
yeah, I think I heard you speak at maybe the Utah Farm Conference a year or two ago. I think you and your husband spoke on stage there, were kind of the keynote speakers for that. Is that right? And anyway, I thought, I should go visit him sometime. So we get to have a virtual tour here. We're grateful that you're here with us, and let's run with it.
Excellent. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for including us. I'm going to talk a little bit about our farm. Pulling up the presentation. So my husband and I, Paul, started Singing Frogs Farm 17 years ago. We are in Northern California. We're in wine country. Sonoma County, we're about an hour and a half north of the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco. We have an 8.5 acre property. And as you can see, it's a lot of veg. It's super intensive veg. You can see our neighbor on the left-hand side is a vineyard, about 140 acre, mostly Chardonnay vineyard. But on our 8 acres, you can see there's a lot of bushes and trees and ponds and open space. And then within that, there's 2.5 acres of field space. We run a year-round CSA, community supported agriculture, where people get a box of veggies every week, in the wintertime every other week, as we have less sunlight and less photosynthesis, and then therefore the plants grow less. And then we also do farmers markets, and our sales are split about equal between the two of those, and then a little bit goes to a few restaurants locally. So all of our food stays within 15 miles of the farm, and that's really important to us. Even though we have a big market
Cool.
down in San Francisco, building our local community, feeding our neighbors is just what we believe is an important part of resilience. Um, One of the things is we have a tremendous farm crew. So you can see me in there, but you can see a lot of other young folks who come to us to learn and grow with us. And then often will go off and start their own farms or will work for other farms. There's a lady here who runs a school farm. There's a guy in this picture who runs another nonprofit, somebody else who is starting his own, another guy who started his own landscaping business. This picture is 2 years old now. So our farm is really focused on the soil, on no-till and regenerative, on being intensive, and on the ecology. It wasn't always that way because when we started out, there was no talk about regenerative. There was no talk about no-till. So we did that we best that we, could find organic tillage. So this is what it looked early. You can see a lot of bare and exposed soil. It was not very productive. We were getting maybe 2 or 3 crops per a space versus right now we're getting 3 to 9 sequential crops in a specific bed. We had a lot of pests and weeds. Here's a look down the farm. These are the same fields that you just saw the overview of. Not very productive, a lot of weeds in there. And this was us learning, and we ran our CSA the first couple of years this way. This is the exact same field from a slightly different angle, and you can see how much is going on in this picture. It's actually about the same time of year also. And because we're not having to run the tractor, we can get in there and plant earlier crops and go. I want to touch base on, I know this is a regenerative legacy, and I don't know how many other regenerative ranchers and farmers are talking, but we were thrilled to be a part of some nutrient density studies. And building resilience within our community, building up our soil carbon and our soil biology, building up our ecology are all important to us. And also having high nutrient density is important in our vegetables. We were approached by Ray Archuleta, who's a no-till specialist, as well as a couple of authors who ended up doing some studies looking at regenerative ranchers, grain growers, dairies, and also vegetable producers, and having them find a comparison farm that grew the same products locally. And then they came out, tested the soil, and then we grew the same product in our In our case, it was cabbage from the same seed packet, and then there was sent off to be tested. First off, our soil biology was tremendously higher, and the assumption is if that you have healthier soil biology, you are going to have healthier food. Just like the biology in our body is important for keeping us healthy, so is the biology in the soil. And so here are some basic biology tests looking at some basic numbers. You can just see it go from 2,000 to 5,000 to 11,000 as we grew in our regenerative practices, which I'll talk about shortly, our no-till practices. And the results of that, here's the book. David Montgomery and Ann Bickley are the authors. If you go on our website, I have a whole page to nutrient density, and there's actually a link to the journal article. But some of the big, ABC vitamins, K, E, B, calcium, we were 30 to 60% higher. But once you started getting into your polysterols, your phytochemicals, the things that we are finding now are really more impactful on our health. It was much higher. And then when we looked at this was comparing our cabbage with an organic neighbor, but when we looked at taking some of our spinach and carrots with the versus USDA conventional, it was over 100% higher in those phytochemicals, phytosterols, and so forth. So really making us feel good about the extra effort that we're putting into our care. So I want to talk a little bit about how we grow, and I'm going to use the principles of soil management. And these are probably not new for most of you in there, especially if you're interested or already farming or ranching regeneratively. We want to disturb the soil as little as possible, keep living plants in the soil as often as possible, grow as many different plants as we can, keeping your soil covered, that soil armor and incorporating armor. This is from the USDA, but there's many different versions of this. And I like going back to it because I've got 2.5 acres in Northern California, but you can do this in so many different ways. My husband and I did a talk with Gabe Brown about 6, 7 years ago. And on the stage, we went through each of these principles and how did we do it on 2.5 acres of veg? And how did he do it on 3,000 acres with cattle and legumes in South Dakota? Same principles, just different manifestations. So that's why I like going back to them. Disturb the soil as little as possible. We know that tillage is destroying the soil, and there's two different ways. These are two quotes I like because they're from big organizations. The one on the bottom from the USDA, they have good science. Maybe their practice isn't the best for small farmers, but tilling the soil is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, forest fire occurring simultaneously to the world of soil organisms. And what's really happening there is as the soil is being tilled, those aggregates are being broken up, and that's total ecosystem destruction. And I actually like this picture here because when we talk tillage these days, we often talk huge John Deeres, going across fields and so forth. But here's a guy with a plow behind some horses, and look at the seagulls coming in behind. They knew exactly what was happening. There was death right behind him. He was bringing up a buffet of earthworms and who else knows what, and they are just digging right in to that. We want to keep that life in the soil, don't we? So that's the biological side of it. The chemical side of it is when those aggregates are broken up, you're increasing the surface area of each piece of soil, each now micro aggregate. And it's sort of like a turbocharger on an engine, putting in more oxygen, and it volatilizes off a lot of the nutrients, a lot of the carbon, a lot of the nitrogen, which as farmers and ranchers, we need in our soil, don't we? So from when we started to now, our soil organic matter, our soil carbon has increased tremendously. It was 2.4%. So carbon is soil organic matter is everything that's in soil that's not minerals, air, and water. It's what allows the soil to take death and turn it back into life, right? And it's 57% carbon. And through these regenerative practices, we were able to bring our soil organic matter up to 8 to 11% at a depth of about a foot. It's higher, closer to the soil than that. And here you can actually look, these are samples we took with Ray Archuleta to do some slake tests. You can look at soil from a perennial crop that was in our same valley bottom, not on our property, and then soil from us. This was dug up on the exact same day. You can see the roots in the one from us on the right. And when we put these in water, the one on the left, we have a sandy loam soil. It just instantly disintegrated versus ours stayed intact for over 48 hours. Um, Also really, really important for water. And we see this manifest. We are live in a Mediterranean climate. So we had our first rain last week. It was about a half inch. And that was our first rain, a little on the early side, which is great, but now there's none in the forecast since March. And so water holding capacity is really important for us. And per the USDA, for every 1 percentage point increase in soil organic matter, an acre of land in the top foot can hold an additional 20,000 gallons of plant available water. We see this manifest in the amount that we have to irrigate. When we first started, we were irrigating in the summer 50 minutes. Every other evening. Now it's 20 to 30 minutes every fourth or fifth evening. So the soil is just holding onto that water and the plants are able to utilize it. Just giving you another view again of our place. Keeping living plants in the soil as often as possible. On a vegetable farm, this looks very different than, say, on a ranch. But the reason we want to do this is drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. Plants are photosynthesizing. They're taking CO2 in through their stoma. They're taking off the carbon. They're resynthesizing that into glucose and then a myriad of other carbon-based products. And then they're exudating that in the soil. That is the primary food for the entire soil food web. They're exudating those carbon-based products into the ground. And then you've got the humification, the building up of your soil organic matter and your soil health from there. This is a slide that I think a lot of you have probably seen. It's in a petri dish, and what we're looking at here is a plant root hair, and it is pushing sugars. We got this from Ray Archuleta, and he's just called it liquid sun, just pushing that out, in this case into the petri dish so we can see it, but this is happening into the soil, feeding initially the bacteria and fungi that have the symbiotic relationships with the plants. But from there, you've got the buildup of the entire soil food web. And this is what we want in order to grow healthy food. So we want to be intensive on our farm. 3 to 8 sequential economic crops in any one bed in a 12-month cycle. You may be saying, hey, they're in California. Yeah, we had frost the other day. We don't get super cold. We'll get into the mid-teens or something like that. But we do utilize hoop houses. We do grow a lot outside, even through the winter. We are thankfully able to do that. But just having one crop be done and immediately getting the next crop in, we are keeping that photosynthetic capture of young plants going. And that's super important for us for the soil, but then also as a farmer, it means more young crops to be harvesting and selling so I can pay my employees and myself and or feed our community. Grow as many different species of plants as practical. Here's an example of something we love doing, which is intercropping. What you're seeing here is a cauliflower that has a pretty wide spacing, and we've got 100% crop cover of this cauliflower in these beds right now. But then guess what? We stacked some functions. We added about a 60% crop of this oak leaf lettuce in there. So now we've got 1.6 crops coming out of the same space, but we've got more photosynthetic capture, more exudating into the soil. Plus the lettuce plants are suppressing weeds, they're maintaining water in the beds. So it's a win-win-win. And just as the cauliflower, our closing canopy, is just the perfect time to harvest the lettuce. If you're in midsummer, it's amazing because then the cauliflower or broccoli or whatever plant you're doing this with is providing light, both sun and wind shade to the lettuce, which makes them nicer and more tender as well. So here are the same crops, maybe about 4 weeks after they were planted, and then once the lettuce is harvested out, and now the cauliflower is starting to put on its heads. You'll see here in these couple of pictures, tomatoes. We'll do the same with tomatoes and have full crops of lettuce down them. Here you've got broccoli, and then we have favas in between. Broccoli and other brassicas don't necessarily feed the mycorrhizae fungi, but they definitely utilize those networks. And so by having a completely different plant, in this case, fava, which we're not using as a cover crop, we're not harvesting with the bean, but we're actually harvesting the light greens. We've got a couple of restaurants that love this. So we'll let it grow up a little bit and then we'll chop it out. And they did quite a lot and helped the broccoli along. And now the broccoli can continue to grow and mature. And one of the reasons that we appreciate the legume, the fava bean that I was just looking there, is because of the little round balls you see there, which are the nitrogen fixing nodules. So these plants are actually serving a very different function with the soil biology and with the soil bringing nitrogen directly in there. Here's a very different one where we've got scallions and status. Status is a flower crop. The scallions are ready to harvest and the flowers are continuing to grow up. So we grow about 90 different crops of vegetables, and then we also grow about 90 different crops of flowers. Aside from our flowers are somewhat new on our farm. We've only been doing them about 6 years, but they take up about 3% of our bed space and they give us about 15 to 18% of our revenue. So people unfortunately pay more for things that are pretty than things that they put in their body. That's one of the unfortunate things of our society. We don't seem to value food quite so much, but I also really love it because of the pollinator, the beneficial insects it brings in, the climactic stabilization, and the beauty, of course. And it gives us more climactic resilience as well as economic resilience. Another different types of plants in the ground. Remember, I'm on the third principles, keep a diversity of plants in the grounds, are perennials. We do a lot with hedgerows, and that's what you're looking at right now. This is a native pollinator friendly habitat here at the between two fields. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to go into hedgerows a little bit more later. The perennials you can't move, but it's still important to have them in the same space. Keeping the soil covered at all the time. Some people call this soil armor. For us, green photosynthesizing plants is, of course, the ideal of soil cover that we want. But sometimes we can't do that, in which case we'll use artificial covers. Here you've got burlap when we're direct seeding. So these were a couple of beds of carrots that went in. They have to be direct seeded. They cannot be transplanted. We generally want to do transplants. So like say the kale crop that's behind Tommy and Carly here. If we were to take out that, well, the kale crop's not ready, but say it's done for some reason, we want to take out that photosynthesizing plant and replace it with another photosynthesizing plant as quickly as we can, to feed the soil biology, but also to continue producing crops as much as possible. There are a few crops you cannot do that with. The primary one on our farm is carrots. You can't transplant carrots, but there's a few others like cilantro and spinach in the winter and arugula and things like that. So here's an artificially covering the soil. Also could be with an organic mulch, like the straw mulch that we're using around these broccoli plants, which will just become food for the soil biology as well. And then sometimes we will actually use a plastic covering. This is a January picture. And so when we're in the dark of winter, yes, we have our overwintering plants that were planted in the autumn and even summer. And when those come out, we really can't get new plants in until, say, February. So we will artificially cover those because for us in Northern California, winter is weed season and they'd otherwise just be full of grass. But we'll also utilize this when, say, we have a bed that gets too weedy and we don't want to pull out the weeds because that's essentially tillage. So we'll just cover them like this and the weeds just compost in place. This is an overview shot where you can see lots of different covering of the soil, everything from straw mulch to red plastic for strawberries to pathway fabric to the occultation right in the bottom front at about 5 o'clock. Okay, so I alluded to this, but how do we transition our beds? This is really, besides harvest, sort of the meat and potatoes of the work on our farm. We grow up one crop, we harvest it, we sell it, but now we've got to get the next crop in. So this is a stop motion, and what we've got here is on the far right, we've got a Asian green that has flowered. This is probably April. And then we've got 3 beds of a cauliflower that are done, and in fact, a couple of them flowered. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut these all out at the soil level using loppers on the left, just harvest knives on the right. All of that biomass is going to go to the compost pile. Then we're going to take our permanent irrigation over to the side. We will apply some organic fertilizers. As a farmer, my job is to export nutrients off the farm every day, so we do have to bring some of those back. And then we'll cover those with a layer of compost and then transplant the next crop. Oh, you got to make sure to have a coffee break. Um, and then we'll transplant the next crop. And you can actually see they're doing an interplant. In the right beds, there's only the primary crop in, and now they're coming through with a secondary crop, which is a lettuce. Um, and water it in, and we are done. If you want to see this video again, it's on our website. It can just run sort of continuously there for you if you wish. But this is how we are taking, again, I think I have it right here, the carbon and biology from the old plants, recycling it, and that will then help the new plants thrive. And that's without any disturbing of the soil. It's very quickly. I think that was 45 minutes to transition those 45-foot beds. And now we have the new crops growing in the ground. Yesterday, for instance, we transitioned over 11 beds to some of our late winter light greens and so forth on the farm.
Perfect.
Okay.
About five
The
minutes,
last one is
Elizabeth.
incorporate animals. We do have animals on the farm. I have some goats, I have some chickens and so forth, but they are not incorporated in the same space as the vegetable crops. We have formed beds and they're highly productive for us and so forth. So we think about it a little bit differently. We think about it in terms of the soil biology. Um, and many people will call that the underground livestock. And then we also think about it in terms of our compost, because we will bring manure into our compost piles. We use quite a lot of compost. About 50% of the initial stock of that is what comes out of our field, but then about 25% is horse manure. I don't I wish I had more diversity, but I have a good friend who boards horses and uses his own feed and so forth, and I trust him. I know my farmer, right? So we'll use his manure, and then we purchase in municipal compost from our community. But just animals in general, we really strongly believe that we want to live together with Mother Nature. And we as humans can produce food and can work and yet still foster a beautiful Mother Nature. Life improves the capacity of the ecosystem to support life. We are Singing Frogs Farm. We have a lot of Pacific chorus frogs. I took this picture yesterday morning. This is right down the main road. We've got beds on either side. You can see some little Brussels sprouts peeking out right past that fox's tail. This is a California gray fox, and he is a hunter on our farm. We actually love the predators on our farm. Our biggest pest are rodents, and so they will come in and do some rodent management. We also are doing our own trapping, but I guess I did get into that. Uh, um, just providing as much habitat as we can for Mother Nature, we find works better. I'm going to get into talking about hedgerows a little bit with this. This is a lot of California agriculture, right? Large scale, and you've got your cash crop there, and then at the edge of the cash crop, there is nothing, right? There's a dirt road for the trucks to come in. Um, this is our farm, right? Our roads are green with clover and native grasses. Yes, you can see some tractor and truck pathways through there, and we have a tremendous amount of perennials throughout the farm. Hedgerows are amazing for bringing in beneficial animals, both of the insect variety as well as reptilian, as well as mammalian, like you just saw with the fox there. And people ask us if we use sprays, if we use pesticides, if we're certified organic. We use no sprays of any kind. We don't want to because of our own health, but also its effect on the soil biology. And here, just a little bit of the talk, let's see, where are we time-wise, on predators versus prey in the insect world. Um, Pest insects are truly herbivores. We call them pests because we don't like them and they do, bad things to our crops, versus beneficials are your predators, right? So having the habitat, and hedgerows are your ideal habitat for your predatory insects because they are longer lived, they have fewer progeny, and they will travel further to go hunting, just like a fox will, versus say a bunny rabbit or something like that, who will have a lot of progeny very quickly in a small amount of space. That analogy is very similar to, say, aphids and lady beetles. Aphids are going to procreate right in their place. They're born pregnant, for crying outside, versus the lady beetles will live up to a year and then come in and go hunting for them. Our hedgerows are also super important for climatic stabilization, windbreaks, but also cooling things down and warming things up when we need that. And then just to show you, studies have shown that the beneficial insects from hedgerows will go up to 250 feet into the field. Well, we designed our farms so that every annual crop is with 125 feet of a hedgerow. Here's installing some, here's them growing up and maturing. I guess I don't have time for climate change, so I'm going to skip
Yeah, we're
through that.
just about need to wrap up, Elizabeth, but this is great and
Yep,
encourage you.
absolutely. If you do want to see more, we have a bunch of lectures and all sorts of other resources on our website. I don't have a gift. I would love to give you a bunch of beets, but most of you are not in Northern California. That is my product.
Awesome.
But definitely do check out our website or our Instagram. And since it is the Regenerative Legacy, a summit, I did just want to quickly touch on legacy. What is our legacy? It is
Yes.
definitely building up the soil, but it is also all the people who come through here. On the right, well, that's my family. My kids are now honorary teenagers, and they're taking whatever they learned and ate from this place and going off into the world. But also every year we get a cadre of amazing people, and usually one or two go off and start their own farm. So we love having people come through in that way, also do workshops and so forth. So there
Okay,
you'll go. I'll
wonderful.
leave you with a pile of cauliflower.
Hey, we love it. We love it. Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful. For if you have a few minutes and want to respond to some of the questions in the chat, I wish we could go through them all. But there's some really good questions in there, Elizabeth. But please put in the chat what you've learned, what your key takeaways, and specifically, you know, we know that one of the key soil health principles is context, right? Uh,
Yes.
Context
Yeah,
does
thank you.
matter. Like what you said, you might be thinking, yeah, that's 2 acres. How does it apply to 2,000 acres? How does it apply to 200 acres, or even 20 acres? The principles absolutely apply. And I appreciate that you brought in Gabe Brown and how they apply on whatever scale we're at. So again, remember, we wrote down what we knew and we set that aside. We're going to pick that up later. Right now, we're making room for increased knowledge. So, yep, go ahead, type in the chat what your epiphanies are. Elizabeth, thank you very much. Let's give her a round of applause. Appreciate you joining us here today. For those that are on camera, thank
Amazing. Thank you
you.
so much for having me.